Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. I'm going to start this video on a bit of a dour note with a little thought experiment. I want you to imagine a child, a little 5-year-old boy. He lives in a house with parents who are regularly critical of him, sometimes in ways that seem contradictory. His parents constantly tell him that many different things are his fault, even if he doesn't understand or feel like he had anything to do with those things in specific. The parents tell him that his existence is a burden on them. If he tries to challenge them, they accuse him of being bad in some way. If he tries to act contrite and do everything they ask, they tell him he's not doing enough and that he needs to do more. They tell him sometimes that they wonder if the world wouldn't be better if he wasn't in it. Tell me, do you think that child, in that kind of environment, is going to be able to thrive? Do you think he's going to have a great read on the world and his role in it? Do you think he's going to have any sort of confidence or trust in himself? Or for that matter, trust in others? Now, realize that this, to varying degrees of severity, has been the larger social environment for a great many other men in the world, and that somehow people have gone for a bafflingly long time without connecting the dots on why so many men are struggling today. After all, we see a number of these kinds of messages towards men coming from mainstream feminism. Now, not all individual feminists will hold all of these views towards men, of course, but these ideas are prevalent enough that it would be relatively trivial for any of us to go and search for examples. More importantly, the version of feminism that is being propagated in, say, educational or organizational institutions, if it is not saying exactly these messages, and let's be honest, in many cases it is not doing enough to contradict them and provide a more measured alternative. I've challenged this a lot on my channel for many reasons. One reason is because I just genuinely think that many of the messages in feminism are not an accurate reflection of the world around us. Another reason is because I think it is harmful towards the relation between the sexes. Yet another reason is because I think that feminist messages are harmful towards women's well-being and towards their perspective of the world around them. But among the most important reasons I challenge feminism is because of its effects on men and men's mental health. I have seen how men suffer and question themselves as a result of the messaging they see all the time, and it is absolutely abhorrent. In this video specifically, I wanted to focus on the prevailing sense of blame it lays at men's feet. And by God, is there an astonishingly large number of ways it lays that blame. The blame of men for making women uncomfortable. The blame of men, often as a singular unit, for making women feel unsafe. The blame of men for desiring women sexually. The blame of men for not doing enough to propel women into prestigious career fields. The blame of men for social constructions in which women are seen as caregivers, thus resulting in undue pressure on women to care for children. The blame of men for how they occupy space in the world. The blame of men for not doing enough around the house in addition to the work they likely do outside of the house. The blame of men for how they choose to, or choose not to, share their emotions or weaknesses with others. The blame of men for neglecting their own mental and physical health when there are so few services out there to help them. The list goes on and on and on. And many feminists will deflect all of this, stating that, no, they are not blaming men for these things, they are blaming the patriarchy for these things. And patriarchy hurts men too. But of course, whether or not we really live in a patriarchy, and I have strongly argued in the past that those of us in the West absolutely do not, even that very conclusion ultimately boils down to, yet again, just blaming men for the creation of a system that supposedly privileges their needs and wants above all else, and yet negatively impacts them in a bafflingly large number of ways. Either way, in my experience, for the men who are impacted by this continual stream of blame coming their way, I find that there tend to be two main patterns of specifically dysfunctional reactions: defiance and internalization. First, defiance looks like men responding with outright rejection, which may often take the form of anger and defensiveness. When I say anger, I mean becoming aggressive or insulting in an excessive manner, turning to generalizing behavior and making broad sweeping statements about all feminists or even all women as a whole, and black pill patterns of thinking, like assuming all women are a lost cause, or that the whole world agrees with those relatively few who peddle the blame all men narrative. When I say defensiveness, I mean an almost compulsive need to refute the claims being made against them, no matter how obviously wrong or outlandish they may be, to the point of wasting a great deal of one's personal time endlessly deflecting these statements in low-level arguments either online or offline, and even with folks who clearly have no intention of changing their opinions whatsoever. I understand why many men would react this way. It doesn't feel good to be accused of all the ills of the world, especially when you feel that not only have you not directly contributed to any of their claims, but that you may yourself be in what you consider to be an underprivileged position. Given this, it's easy to get your hackles up and tell anyone who says any of these things to go climb Mount Phallus mouth first. There are a number of problems with this, though. First, coming into a situation in white-hot rage usually makes it difficult to effectively get your point across, assuming you're even attempting to do so in a logical manner. It's easy to say things that you really don't mean, and it rarely gets to the root of the problem that caused you to get angry in the first place. Second, much of the time, this kind of a response is not effective in getting anyone to change their mind. In fact, the opposite is often true. It causes people to become defensive, or even worse, to double down. They may use your anger or reactivity as proof that you are guilty, rather than seeing you as trying to defend yourself. Finally, this approach often takes a lot of mental energy on your part for very little payoff, and that rarely makes anyone feel good about themselves. A more functional response in these cases is instead to simply build a wall of dismissiveness towards any blame they try to assign to you. Give them essentially as little reaction as possible while still dismissing the claim. Just a calm, nope, or, well, that's wrong, or even a, sorry you feel that way, but I'm not going to take that on myself. I feel that this is a better response than simply ignoring their messages outright. Again, for a few reasons. When people ignore it outright, it can give the appearance that more people agree with their view, or at least do not contest it. It can also relay an appearance of guilt as well. Responding in the negative in a calm way that offers them virtually nothing shows you are outwardly rejecting their message, which may lead others to feel more comfortable doing the same. It also gives folks very little to retaliate against, and with any luck, you may even throw them off guard long enough to question their own narrative as well. Now, things can get a little more complicated when we move into the other dysfunctional response I talked about, internalization. This, of course, occurs when men actually take on the messages of guilt that they hear from feminist narratives and make them a part of their own self-identity. This can take several forms: questioning and second-guessing one's own actions, viewing oneself through a negative lens, potentially leading to anxiety and self-hatred, overcompensating to try and absolve themselves, regardless of any evidence of actual wrongdoing, doubting their worthiness to find or maintain a relationship with a woman, depression, and even helplessness or despair over the inability to fix the problems that are ostensibly causing women to blame them in the first place. This requires more of an in-depth discussion because it tends to require more solutions than the first category. After all, someone who has internalized these messages of blame could, in theory, respond to an accusation with a dismissive, sorry you feel that way, but it will be surface level only and will do absolutely nothing to fix the internal guilt that they are still harboring. So let's talk about some strategies to that end. First, I encourage you to start taking on guilt only for actions in which you have directly engaged. If you acted like a terrible person at one point and feel guilty for that, that can be a sensible response. If you deliberately sabotaged a female coworker at work by preventing her from taking on a higher up position or getting a raise in some way, sure, shame on you. But if someone wants you to feel guilty because you merely did not step aside so women could enter higher positions, or because you dared to walk on the same side of the street as a woman and she felt uncomfortable about that, or because you innocently tried to ask someone out on a date and they turned out not to be interested, you should take on absolutely no guilt for any of that. Another helpful tip to distinguish the two: is someone telling you you should feel guilty because of something you specifically did, or because they perceived some ill intent from something that you did, but that in no way was something you intended? It is unrealistic to take on guilt for things for which you have absolutely no or very little control, and it is certainly not fair to hold yourself to unrealistic expectations in order to be considered one of the good ones. For example, if you say correctly that you have no power to change a societal system that feminists claim underprivileges women, they may reply by saying, "Well, that's easy. You can take action by advocating for them." Now, you're certainly welcome to do so if you feel that there is a legitimate case of unfairness, but if you don't, you are under no obligation to take on any guilt for that. If anyone tries to make you feel that way, you can feel free to ask them the last time they advocated in any way on your behalf. Beyond basic human decency and respect for their fundamental rights, you owe them nothing. Don't let them trick you into thinking otherwise. Next is to take time to actually understand some of the reasons feminists lay blame in the first place, as it is often not about you or anything you in particular have done. For example, many have been hurt themselves and are themselves in that anger or black-pilled phase I mentioned above, just directed towards men. Unfortunately, unlike men, their complaints and generalizations are usually sanctioned in polite society, but others are parroting a message they were taught by someone they trust or hold in high regard, like a professor or family member. Many have not questioned their own lens or have no experience with a different perspective or information that contradicts their views. While none of this is necessarily an excuse, learning not to take what they say personally is an important step in learning to detach from unearned blame. In a similar vein, another important step is accepting that their opinions are not law and are no more powerful than anyone else's. Although messages that men should feel guilty are prominent and often shared without shame or hesitation, prominence does not mean that their messaging is necessarily correct. After all, there are many examples throughout history where certain predominant or popular opinions turned out to be wrong or even abhorrent. The focus should instead be on objective facts, because objective facts can be observed or verified. And even if someone makes a claim about men as a whole, unless they can prove with objective facts that you yourself are directly contributing to a problem, you are under no obligation to take their opinion with any more weight than any other random schmuck on the street about anything else. Another technique is in practicing mindfulness and noting any moments you start to feel that guilt rising up. Take some time and explore where that stems from. See if you can apply any of the things I've already mentioned to any such history. Think of any lessons you can learn from the past or any behaviors you could change if you were to go back to those moments. In doing this, I would encourage you to come at this exercise from a position of self-improvement rather than a position of atonement, because the latter is past-oriented, and you may never be able to successfully atone to anyone in particular. But the former is future-oriented and gives you something to actually strive towards. And of course, during all this, make your best effort to acknowledge any circumstances for which you had no control over and start to work towards letting that guilt go. This may take the form of practicing positive self-talk, or having a mantra, or working through your thoughts via journaling. Lastly, a great way to combat internalized guilt is to try to replace these maladaptive thought patterns with a focus on personal strengths and positive achievements. Rather than reflecting on ways you may have theoretically let someone else down, Focus instead on concrete examples of traits that you appreciate about yourself, or positive things that you have done in the world. Resist the urge to compare yourself to others and what they have done or not done. Just focus on yourself, as this helps to avoid thoughts of not doing enough. Think of things that you can do in the world going forward as well, not because you feel guilty, but because you want to either seek self-improvement or make the world a better place, or both. By replacing negative thoughts with thoughts like these, you not only replace bad with good, but you can give yourself something actionable, something to strive towards. And you do so because it's something that you want instead of something someone else tells you you should do. I've been thinking a lot about this topic because I've seen firsthand the effects that this horrible blaming attitude that is so prevalent in our society can have on men. Now more than ever, I am especially sensitive to the struggles that men are going through, and I want to be able to combat it in as many ways as I can. I hope that some of you can make use of these tips, or can give it to others who may be experiencing the negative effects of internalized blame. The world is full enough of negativity as it is. You guys don't need to be asked to unfairly shoulder any more of it than you deserve. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.